In today's video, I'm going to be embarking on another challenge playthrough in the Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion. As per some recommendations, this week's run is attempting to finish the Fighters Guild questline whilst role-playing as a beggar. This video isn't intended to be a recount of the storyline, even though it inherently has those elements, but more so a play-by-play into the build itself. The Beggars of Oblivion, in my opinion, are some of the most iconic NPCs within the game. Their dialogue, names, and involvement within the Thieves Guild questline certainly have given them a permanent, rent-free space in my mind. In order to accurately play as a beggar, I looked into their NPC class as well as specific characteristics. All beggars within Oblivion are the commoner class. This means that their major skills include armor, blunt, hand-to-hand, alchemy, acrobatics, mercantile, and speechcraft. Their specialization is in stealth, and their preferred attributes are personality and endurance. Now though, the catch with beggars is that they don't carry much in their inventory, only wear lower class clothing, live in poverty, and fight only with their fists. These are the skills and preferences that need to get me through this combat-heavy storyline. Another special little quirk about beggars is that all of them are infected with at least one disease. So, I appropriately decided to give my character, Mucus, the disease of brain rot. This condition must remain on my character until the end of the questline. Some additional notes before beginning: I'm choosing to stay at level 1 for this playthrough. In certain instances, this renders the playthrough to be more challenging, and in others, less challenging. As well, given my character's build, I won't be needing to use any items that scale to my level. It feels like playing the game like this will blend the worlds of both fun and challenging. In the way of looting, buying, selling, acquiring gold, etc., I can only use my Fighters Guild payouts and any septims I've acquired directly from looting fallen foes and searching containers whilst out on the job. The same goes for health potions if they're found while out on contracts. The difficulty slider can't be adjusted, non-storyline essential followers cannot be used, no usage of magicka other than greater powers from birth signs, and lastly, no console commands. At the end, I'll give my overall thoughts on this build. Again, please let me know which builds and which questline or faction you'd like to see them in next, and currently on the screen are a list of them lined up. Without further ado, it's time to start the Oblivion challenge run-through of the Fighters Guild questline while playing as a beggar. The adventure begins in the city of Anvil. Entering inside of the Fighters Guild Hall, I spoke with Azan about enlisting. Something I've always liked about the Fighters Guild is that they allow anybody to join and there's no trial run or prerequisite that needs to be taken care of. Azan gave me the contract of a rat problem. I left the guild and made my way into Arvena Thalos' house. Speaking with her, she was hysterical about her pet rats being killed by some unknown creature in the basement. Heading down there myself, I began to battle the mountain lion. I got a few cheap heavy shots in whilst it was focused on killing the rats. Eventually, it turned its attention on me and started giving me the claws. It didn't take too long though for a rat to finish it off. Late game mountain lions can certainly prove to be a lot of trouble, so I was semi-worried to face it, but everything worked out in the end. Returning back to Arvena, she then asked me to locate Panaris and get to the bottom of where the lions were coming from. Doing so, together, the experienced hunter and I wandered outside of the city walls and eventually came across their den. Normally at this part, I'm charging in, weapon in hand, taking hits and dealing equal amounts of damage, but this time, I laid back and let Panaris take the heat. He certainly did a way better job than I would have done, as after a few swings with his sword, one would drop dead. Luckily, the attention stayed on the hunter, and I was able to leap in from behind and get a few cheap shots in with my fist. This plan worked perfectly, and before I knew it, all of them were dead. Panaris gave me the go-ahead to leave, and I returned back to Arvena. She again was hysterical about another mountain lion in her basement, which led me going back down there to take care of it. This one-on-one fight certainly gave me a little more trouble. One of the common issues I would face with just using my fists was a reach problem. Either I would need to back up because of a lack of defensive skills, or the enemy would lunge in and lunge out, rendering my attacks ineffective. Soon, the last mountain lion was defeated, but I got a sweet taste of things to come with my health getting down below half. The rest of the quest was pretty standard. Arvena asked me to look into her neighbor, Quill Weave, who might have been behind it. Doing so, I witnessed her putting meat by a hole in the wall of Arvena's backyard. Confronting her, she came clean and admitted to doing the act. I was then faced with choosing to side with Quillweave for a boost in my mercantile skill, or with Arvena for a boost in my speechcraft. Both could have been useful for this playthrough, but ultimately, I decided to go with Arvena's reward. She was also the one to pay me out 100 gold for this successful contract, and just like that, the first Fighters Guild quest as a beggar was down. To be honest, I knew that regardless of whichever class or playstyle I was going for, the first few quests of any faction were going to be a breeze. There's a reason after all that they're the first set of quests a player can do. Returning back to Azan, he promoted me to the rank of apprentice and then gave me my second contract. This was the quest of the unfortunate shopkeeper and involved break-ins at Lel's Quality Merchandise out on the waterfront. Going to Norbert's shop, he gives the usual speech that the break-ins always happen at night and that somehow they don't forcefully enter inside, even with new locks. He leaves and I spotted a detail I've never noticed before. After getting to this stage in the quest, the bandits that break in just sort of awkwardly stand outside of the shop until nightfall. I found it to be quite funny actually, and definitely thought that when Norbert passed by them, he should have recognized them immediately. Heading on inside of the shop and waiting until nightfall, I sort of forgot how the AI programming worked for this one. I didn't want to take on all three men at the same time, as I knew that unbalanced fights were something my beggar character couldn't handle. So, upon hiding and not seeing them at all, I crept forward a bit. Real quick, the aggro came, so I ran outside. Fortunately, it was only one of the bandits chasing after me, so I was able to stand my ground and fight. Ainveer the Wood Elf wasn't so difficult to face. I just battered him down with my fists repeatedly, and soon enough he was dead. Going back inside of the shop, I aggroed the remaining two bandits and then ran out into the Gold Coast again. Upon turning the corner of the shop, I had lost both of the attackers somehow. Wandering along the docks, I noticed that the Nord, Storn the Burly, was fighting against the guard, and he was slain practically right away. The Dark Elf though stood behind the shop waiting for my return. Getting in close, the fight began and he fought using an Iron Claymore. Honestly, I was more worried about mass damage than DPS when it came to battling against enemies. He fought well, but in the end, the same guard who killed Storn fired off a cheap shot, dealing the killing blow. Going back inside of Lel's Quality Merchandise, I debated stealing some stuff from the shop, but figured that kind of crossed into a burglar/rogue type of playthrough. I entered inside of the Flowing Bowl and informed Norbert that the break-ins were dealt with once and for all. It always makes me chuckle when he comes to the realization that all of these men once worked for him. He pays me out my 100 gold, and I move on from Anvil. Again, so far so good with this build. Arriving in Shadenhall, I speak with Burzgrokash. He gives me the Desolate Mine contract, and I'm to bring a shipment of weapons to some fighters within a cave. After a short walk north, I arrive outside of the mine and face off against two goblins guarding the entrance. Thankfully, they don't hit hard at all, and both take very few hits to kill. I enter inside and hand over the weapons to my fellow guildmates. I've always liked hearing the reactions of the High Elf and Orc when they get the weapons they didn't want. Together, the four of us charged through the mine, and I tried to lay back in order to let them deal with the majority of the enemies. That plan quickly went out the window though, as the first goblin I saw aggroed onto me, and my companions continued onwards. I checked the pockets of the dead miners in order to see if they had gold on them, but sadly, they didn't. I continued through the mine, losing sight of my allies, and getting aggroed onto by more goblins. Again though, my safety in here was never really an issue, especially if I got overwhelmed, as the goblins were pretty weak. I discovered quickly that my fighting preference involved mostly heavy attacks. I liked the satisfying hard punches, and in my mind, it felt like I was able to kill quicker. Going around the mine, I found some lootable chests that had pocket change in them. It didn't seem like much now, but I figured it was certainly going to add up over time. Before I knew it, I got the journal update that all of the goblins were dead, and I could now return to Burz. Doing so, I got paid out 100 gold, which felt low, especially considering it included some sort of bonus for keeping everyone alive. He promoted me to the rank of journeyman and told me that Velena Danton and Coral wanted to see me. Heading over to Coral, I went inside of the guild hall and spoke with Velena. She then directed me to Modron Oren, who gave me the contract of unfinished business. I was to go and seek out someone named Maglier in Skingrad, as he defaulted on a contract. Whilst in the West Weald, I paid a visit to my favorite shopkeeper and bought out some of her weak healing potions. Something I never really bother with, but decided to utilize for this playthrough was the haggle feature. I cranked up the bar and managed to get some good deals on the potions. Seeking out Maglier, I met with the insufferable Bosmer, and he told me about the contract to find Brennus Astus' journal out in Fallen Rock Cave. Taking matters into my own hands, I made my way northwest until I arrived outside of the cavern entrance. To be honest, I couldn't remember what I'd be dealing with on the inside. It didn't take long though for the reminder to come through. Facing off against mostly skeletons, they weren't too difficult to defeat either, although they fought with weapons and took a few more hits to kill than the goblins did. So far at this point, I think the unfortunate shopkeeper should have been the trickiest quest to deal with, but due to it taking place in a city, there was a really easy workaround for the fight. Along the way to the journal, I continued to loot the chests of any gold present. Eventually, I got in a little bit of hot water when I aggroed onto 2 skeletons at a time. I beat down the first one pretty good, but by the time I had to face the second one, my health was creeping towards an alarming amount. I popped my first bit of health potions and proceeded onto my next 2v1. This interaction went a whole lot smoother, and I think it was because one of the skeletons was an archer. Just beyond them was the room in which held Astus' journal. I killed the guards inside, took it, and worked my way back out of here, looting what I could along the way. I was faced with the choice of covering for Maglier or throwing him under the bus. I usually toss him to the wolves because he sucks, but this time I wanted to see how he could have been of benefit to me down the line. So I told Orain that he didn't default and I got paid out my usual sum. Right away, Orain offered me my next contract. The Drunk and Disorderly quest brought me over to the city of Leowin and ultimately into the Five Claws Lodge. Speaking with the peeved Vantis, he told me that the Blackwood Company has taken all of the work, so with nothing to do in the meantime, they've resorted to getting blasted. Attempting to find them work, Witse Dutse informs me that someone named Margart might have a job for them. Seeking her out, she tells me that she has something for the guild to do, but first, we need to prove our worth to her. She asks me to bring her 5 samples of ectoplasm. This might have been one of the tasks I was looking forward to the least. As a poorly skilled hand-to-hand beggar, I don't really do any damage to spirits and can't afford to buy the ectoplasm. I thought for a bit on what I could do, and then it came to me. Varule from the Ghost Ship of Anvil's side quest was about to become my best friend. She gave me the key to the Serpent's Wake, and I got to work. Entering inside, I got aggroed onto by 2 wraiths, and then ran back out to the Gold Coast. Varule did her best to fight against the specters, but ended up falling off the dock into the water below. I continued to drag the ghosts through the boardwalk where a couple of NPCs came to my aid. Most of them were unable to deal damage though, until finally a guard stepped in and started to put the work in. One wraith flew off to who knows where, and the other remained on the boardwalk. The first wraith was defeated, and I tried to find the second one. I thought it entered inside of the city, but couldn't locate it anywhere. Returning back to the docks, the wraith turned up to be right in front of the gates, and the fight resumed. This time, Valerie was reset back onto the boardwalk, and she came rushing in with shock magic. The second ghost was defeated, and I repeated the process all over again. Dragging 2 more wraiths out from the ship, this time the town's defenses brought the fight to them, but it sort of backfired. Both Valerie and the guard ended up falling down into the sea below. This caused the specters to get stuck in a movement animation, tracking their foes in the water. At one point, one of them managed to take the plunge below and got killed for it, but the fourth was stun-locked for quite some time. Finally, the old saying, "the enemy of my enemy is my friend," came to fruition, and a sleeper agent for the Mythic Dawn came to finish the job for me. I found the last wraith, dragged it out from the depths of the boat, and the townsfolk came to my aid one final time. Again, I was really lucky that this specific quest was held in a city, or else I would have had to come up with a whole different plan. 5 samples of ectoplasm in hand, I brought them to Margart and Leowin, and then told Vantis and his men that they now had work. Returning back to Orain, I informed him of the Blackwood Company, got paid out my 100 gold, and was promoted to the rank of swordsman. So far, so good with this build. I knew though that there wasn't much of a future with it, and eventually I'd hit a hard roadblock. With no leveling, no way to progressively use my skills, and no way to upgrade my defenses, my timer was ticking. Returning to Azan in Anvil, he gave me my next contract, a Den of Thieves. He told me the awesome news that I'd be working with my friend Maglir, and together, the two of us asked around for information. Rano told us to speak with Newheim the Portly, and Newheim spilled the beans. He told us that it's a group of Bosmer, and that they're held up in the nearby Hirota cave. Whilst in there, we should be on the lookout for his flagon. Maglir and I traveled the road north out of the city, until finally we arrived at the cave. The first route we took whilst inside led us to a false wall. Behind it were some of the Bosmer that we needed to hunt down. Maglir and the bandits got themselves into a stalemate as they both aggroed onto one another and decided the fastest way to reach each other was through the wall. This continued for quite some time until someone from the other side lowered the false wall. We fought against an archer and a spellcaster. The archer shot Maglir with some sort of demoralized arrow, and that left me alone to fight. I beat down the spellcaster quickly and moved on to the archer. She was a slippery one, as she would keep on her toes and move around a lot. Eventually, Maglir regained his courage and dealt the killing blow. We moved along further into Hirota Cave and got ourselves in a hairy situation. There were 3 Bosmer in one of the rooms, and altogether, they proved to be a bit of a problem. I took on one of them, Maglir the other, and the third ran away after conjuring up a zombie. My health was low, but I defeated my opponent and went after the zombie conjurer. Maglir went down, and I readied myself for the 2v1. Fortunately, it never came, and I was able to beat down the second opponent. My health got scary low, I drank my last potion, Maglir went down again, and I was fighting against a pantless archer. Luckily, he took forever to knock his arrow, and I was able to get up in his face and utilize my DPS. Thrangerfin was dead, and I was able to rest up. The next room we went into contained 2 archers, standing over a common area of sorts. I stood atop a makeshift bridge, fighting one of them when all of a sudden, it collapsed. In a beautiful motion, Maglir was waiting for us underneath, and we struck the bandit down together. I soloed the other archer, and the final Bosmer was waiting for us in a separate room. Maglir and I charged in at her together, and she didn't prove to be much of an issue. Once all was said and done, I went and retrieved Newheim's flagon. Returning back to Anvil, I handed the cup over to Newheim in exchange for 3 bottles of his special brew. Then, I went over to Azan back at the guild, he paid me out my 100 gold, and sent me back over to Burz. Before going to Shaden Hall, I paid a visit to Falanu and bought some more health potions with my earnings and findings. Unfortunately, even though I was only level 1, it felt like what I could afford in exchange for how much it would heal me wasn't really cutting it. I could easily blow through 3 bottles in one fight, which equated to 2 quests worth of gold. Making my way to the Shaden Hall Fighters Guild, Burz gave me my next contract, Emelian's debt. I set out to the Water's Edge settlement north of Leeuwin and spoke with Bien Emelian. She informed me of her father's gambling debt and said that the best way to pay it off was by retrieving her grandfather's sword and armor in their family tomb. I traveled to the Emelian family crypt east of Water's Edge and lined up outside of the tomb. I couldn't remember the types of enemies I'd be facing in here, thinking that they could be ghosts. I decided that for this quest, I'd utilize the other benefits of being a beggar, the ability to run and hide. I charged into the tomb and got my legs in motion. It was mostly undead in here, which I totally could have taken on, but I decided to just commit by keeping my head down and legs moving. I didn't know my way through the tomb, so quite a few times I found myself lost or in a dead end of some kind. The more I ran through this dungeon, the more I was happy to have skipped past all of these fights. I kept moving and found myself in a second zone called the Sarcophagus Chamber. This place was filled with a lot more undead, and they were at every turn. Soon, I found myself in the crypt containing Brusef Emelian's cuirass and sword. I was crossing my fingers that there was a second way out of here, as I was going to have a lot of problems backtracking through the tomb otherwise. Thankfully, there was a path that led me back to the first zone. Through a hole in the ground, I dropped down right in front of the exit and swam my way back to Water's Edge. Handing the relics back to Bien, I traveled back to Burz in Shaden Hall and he paid me out. I was then promoted to the rank of Protector and sent off to Modron. Completing the quest this way felt kind of thrilling. It was exciting being chased and knowing that if I messed up, I would get cornered and slain. It was also good to know that if I needed to utilize this method again, it wasn't that hard to do. Or, so I thought. Traveling back to Coral and meeting with Orain, he gave me an off-the-record private contract. For this quest, titled The Master's Son, I'm to accompany Varanus Danton, Velena's son, to Non-Wool Cave in search of someone named Galtus Previa. Velenia helicopters Varanus, and Modron fears he isn't living up to his full potential. Leaving the hall, I went to collect Varanus, and together, we traveled along the road north to Non-Will Cave. This was also a quest I was really nervous for. I knew that this cavern contained trolls, and I wasn't sure how much damage they would deal to me, or vice versa. Entering inside, Varanus charged off, sword in hand, aggroed onto something who knows where. I followed him, and soon enough, we ran into two savage trolls. Varanus ran right past them, and I was left to 2v1 them. I was really surprised to see though that I was able to take their health down in big chunks with each heavy hit. However, the same went for them towards me. Varanus had an easy time fighting them off with his steel set. Upon entering into the next zone though, I encountered the real problem within Non-Will Cave. The trolls may have been a not so bad fight, but the ogres were outright brutes. They hit me incredibly hard and my fists could barely keep me in the fight. 3 hits by one ogre and I was already almost dead. I popped some health potions and Varanus came to his senses. I held down aggro while he dealt damage, and soon we were ready to move on. Fortunately, those seemed like the only ogres that we needed to face, as the next area only contained 3 savage trolls. It felt nice that I was able to beat them down with 2 or so heavy attacks. Varanus and I cleared the space, fought against one more troll, and then located the body of Galtus Previa. I always loved the detail of the broken Blackwood Company shield by his body. The foreshadowing and build-up for the Fighters Guild never ceases to amaze me. With Galtus' condition verified, I fled the cave with Varanus and returned back to Modron and Coral. Every quest that gives me a follower during the storyline sends a breath of relief through me. It's always nice to know that I can rely on them to deal most of the damage. Modron gives me a dagger for my efforts and sends me off to find Maglir again as he's defaulted on another contract. I wasn't sure how to navigate the usage of items that were handed to me as rewards. On one hand, they were acquired through rule-abiding means. On the other though, it doesn't really fit the profile of a beggar. So ultimately, if the reward wasn't a consumable or gift, I decided against using it. The quests were certainly ramping up from here. The past few proved to have their difficulties, and as mentioned before, the potions were a very temporary solution to getting through these contracts. Arriving in Breville, I went to the Lonely Suitor Lodge and located the Little Fetcher. I hold hard feelings against Maglir because all my character has done is cover for him and make his life easier. In return, he acts rude and patronizing towards the player. Anyways, Maglir says that he's with the Blackwood Company now and that he won't be doing the contract. Because I covered for him out in Skingrad though, he fills me in on who the contract is for. Heading over to the Mages Guild, I spoke with Aryari who informed me she's waiting on the 10 samples of Imp Gall that the Fighters Guild promised to deliver. She points me over to Robber's Glen Cave and I make my way over there. Along the way, I run into a bandit on the road and honestly, as sad as it is, he alone gives me a run for my money. The fight comes down to the wire and luckily, I'm the one to deliver the killing blow. This interaction though really showed me just how awful this build would continue to get if I progressed in levels. Entering inside of the cave, this was honestly one of the easier quests that I've had in a while. Obviously the magic that the imps cast counters my close range fist attacks. However, as soon as I closed the distance, their little feet attacks didn't really cause me much harm. As per usual, I looted as much gold as I could. Even against these weaker imps, battling more than one proved to be a little bit difficult, as my player had no way of handling the situation or the ability to adequately restore health. Before I knew it, I had collected all 10 samples of the Imp Gall and could return back to Aryari at the Mages Guild. She gave me a base Ring of Aegis as a bonus, which, again, I was sad that I couldn't use, but ultimately felt justified in not doing so. Orain rewarded me with my 100 gold payout and then promoted me to the rank of Defender. He immediately got into the next contract, and at the risk of sounding like a broken record, this was one that I knew would likely prove to be a lot of trouble. As a level 10 warrior, the fight with Azani was really challenging to say the least, so I couldn't imagine what it was going to be like as a level 1 beggar. I met with Orain at his house after dark, and he filled me in on the whole Azani Blackheart debacle, a potential setup regarding the elusive warlord and the Blackwood Company. I fast traveled over to Leowyn and met with Modron at the guild hall there. Then together, we traveled to the alien ruin of Arpenia, where the contract involving Azani and the Blackwood Company supposedly took place. I remember in my original video of playing through this questline, Arpinia confused me a lot as I spent a long time looking around the ruins in search of Azani. I expected a quest update or for Orain to tell me some vital information, but none of that came. I was just running around aimlessly, believing there to be something that I missed in here. Even for this challenge run, after defeating all of the nuisance critters and exploring every inch of the local map, it took Modron a while to actually have his dialogue triggered. I had forgotten the trek to the next ruin of Atatar was a slow and miserable one. Outside of Arpinia, we encountered some bandits, and learning my lesson from last time, I let Modron do all of the fighting. Together, we trudged along until finally we entered inside of the ruin. Here I took point, but let Modron do all of the dirty work. I was actually able to deal decent amounts of damage to the bandits, but Orain killed them in 1 or 2 blows, and for some reason, they'd aggro onto him most of the time instead of me. This continued for quite a while, and to be honest, it made my time going through Atatar incredibly easy. Soon though, we entered into the zone that contained Azani Blackheart. I laid eyes on him and began to sneak around in the dark. I wondered if we'd be able to get a good sneak attack in as the first strike, but ultimately, Modron blew our cover. In one swift heavy attack with Sinweaver, Azani crushed my health down to below a quarter left. I was sweating hard here and gulped down a ton of health potions. Modron and Azani were mainly duking it out while I got in there to throw around some sucker punches. I barely did any damage to him, and even Orain was having trouble getting some good hits in. I knew that if Modron went unconscious, that was it and I'd die shortly after. We continued to press the attack, my fingers crossed for Modron's health, and soon after, he dealt the killing blow. I took Azani's ring for Orain as proof that the Fighters Guild completed this mission. There were no rewards for this one, so I'm assuming Azani's gear was meant to be rewarding enough. Orain promoted me to the rank of Warder, and it felt like I hit a big milestone in this challenge playthrough. Continuing onwards with the questline, I returned to Burrs and Shadenhall, who gave me the contract of the fugitives. I fast traveled down to the city of Breville and learned of the location housing the escaped criminals. Bloodmane Cave was a short distance away from the city. I knew for this one that there were only 4 enemies to fight. What I couldn't remember though was how tough they'd be. I tracked down the first one, who was a Nord named Hlothgar, and he fought with a mace and shield. This was the first time I tested out using a greater power against an enemy. I cast Star of the West on him, which absorbed his fatigue by 100 points. Even after using it though, the fight was still incredibly close. We went hit for hit, and by the time I was done with him, he had my health down to about a quarter. The next fugitive I came across was a red guard named Ashanta. She fought with a longsword and a shield, really controlling the fight with her reach. It ultimately ended the same way as the previous one, with my remaining health being below a quarter. I was honestly really thankful that none of them were side by side, or that would have been impossible to deal with. The 3rd and 4th fugitives were located in the next zone. Dreetley, an Argonian archer, was the next matchup. Thankfully, he took forever to let loose his arrows, and I was able to get up in his face and beat him to a pulp. The fight ended and I was pretty much unscathed. The last fight was honestly such a strange one though. I found and started to wail on Enrion. He cast Chameleon and summoned Zombie, then proceeded to run away. Enrion ran through the entirety of the 2nd zone. He was just as fast as I was, so it was difficult to keep up with his sharp turns and movement patterns. At one point, I tried to cut him off in the tunnels, but that ended up being a mistake in of itself. He cast some powerful destruction magic on me, and the zombie dealt some pretty heavy blows to my health. I drank up on potions, and then Enrion resumed his marathon around Bloodmane Cave. Wondering how long this was going to last for, I remembered looting some bottles of skooma in a previous dungeon. Sculling some moon sugar down felt pretty spot on for the Beggar build, so I drank all 3 bottles and started flying across the cavern. Before I knew it, Enrion was dead and I was free to leave the cave. These quests were most definitely getting trickier, and I honestly started to get nervous for a few of them that were coming up. Returning back to Burrs and Shadenhall, he paid me out my 100 gold. Traveling to Anvil, I spoke with Azan, who gave me the contract of the Wandering Scholar. Something I've always been fascinated with for this quest is the journal entry that's associated with it. It tells the player that Brittle Rock Cave is located northeast of Such. Since it doesn't make the distinction between Fort Such and the removed city of Such, I've always assumed it to be referencing the latter. a lost piece of the game's history, if you will. Along the way to the cave, I was attacked by a wolf and contracted the disease of Helljoint. This disease drains both agility and speed for 5 points, both very important attributes for my character's build. But since I can't cure one disease without curing all of them, I decided to take on the increased challenge. Arriving at the cave, I entered inside and spoke with Alante, who was looking to quote-unquote study a lost Daedric shrine. I knew what kinds of enemies I'd be facing down here, and to be honest, I thought they'd be some of the easiest ones yet. Unfortunately, that couldn't be further from the truth. These stunted scamps were able to withstand my fists fairly easily, and they were draining my health no problem. Their fire magic and Marshawn Lynch shoulder tackles had me really nervous. I kicked myself a bit for not replenishing my potions beforehand, as I only had 2 left. I killed the first stunted scamp and drank my last health potion. I attempted to take on the second one, but quickly ended that endeavor when it started to beat me down. I brought the scamp all the way back to Alante, and thankfully she aggroed onto it. I was 1 hit away, ready to accept my fate, when my Altmer companion shot down the attacker with a fireball. I rested for an hour, but noted that I had to be really cautious going forward. Allowing Alante to lead the way, I had to be really careful, as while she was certainly a lot more equipped than I was to handle the situation here, if she died, I'd have to restart this whole process over again. A technique that worked really well, as with most of these follower-based quests, involved me holding aggro and her dealing the damage. For one of the areas, it almost seemed like Alante could go past the scamps unnoticed, and if I stayed out of sight, close enough to her, we maybe could have snuck past all of the enemies. Ultimately though, it didn't work out and I never got to test my theory again. At this point too, most of the scamps we fought were bunched up into pairs, so I tried my best to be strategic and smart with the fighting, preserving Alante's life just a little bit further. Finally, the 2 of us made it to the chamber with the destroyed statue of Molag Bal. We took out the final 2 scamps, me battering them with my fists, and Alante swinging away with her conjured weapon. She told me that this was far enough, thanked me for the escort, and rewarded me with a book. Exiting the way I came in and returning back to Azan in Anvil, he paid me out my earnings and promoted me to the rank of Guardian. Honestly, it was after this quest where the contracts really started to take a turn for the worst. Before progressing onwards, I took a quick pit stop in Skingrad in order to restock on health potions. I had a good bit of gold at this point and managed to buy around 12 of them. Traveling back to Coral Guildhall, Modron informs me that Varanus Daunton was sent on a mission to Forsaken Mine and has yet to return. He asks me to look into it. I make my way over there and enter inside. Within the first section there are a lot of dead bodies and nuisance critters lingering around them. There's obvious evidence of some battle, and you can even see a Blackwood Company mercenary amongst the carnage. Progressing further into the cave, I came across my first savage troll. These ones were built like those up at Nonwell Cavern, and it took me only a few heavy punches to kill them. The issue was that this time I didn't have any help. The Lost Passages portion was the next zone into the mine. There were more trolls here, and now they were starting to group up together. The more I swung away with my fists and the more my fatigue lowered, the longer the battles took. At one point, I was able to successfully sneak past one troll, but immediately ran into another one in one of the tunnels. The fight was pretty close, and if I had aggroed the other troll just behind me, I likely would have received my first death. Just a little further ahead through more tunnels and even more trolls, I located the body of Varanus Daunton. Taking his journal, I left the way I had came in through this cave, unfortunately catching the attention of the troll I originally snuck past. I beat it down, exited Forsaken Mine, and traveled back to Orain in Coral. He was very displeased to hear about Varanus' death, and said that the 2 of us should lay low. He tells me I should go out and complete more guild-officiated contracts in the meantime. I return to Azan in Anvil and ask him for more work. He informs me though that because of mine and Modron's little side adventures, resulting in the death of Elena's son, Orain's been expelled and I've been demoted back down to Defender. As for contracts, Azan sends me off to seek someone named Sirach in Bruma regarding a relic called St. Alicia Stone. Doing so, Sirach informs me that this stone was stolen from the chapel not long ago by a group of bandits. Following the compass, it leads me out through the eastern gate and a bit beyond the road. Standing alone just off the pathway, I run into one of the bandits who informs me that his group no longer has the stone and that everybody but him was killed off by ogres. The ogres took the stone to a not so nearby alien ruin called Sedor. For some reason, I thought it would be a faster route to travel over to Forsaken Mine and work my way north from there. What I didn't account for was the uphill journey, which really ended up killing a lot of time. Eventually though, I made it to Sedor and entered inside. At first, I was thinking of trying to sneak my way past the ogres. I thought it would be a new and fun way to complete the contract. That all went down the drain though when they spotted me right away, resulting in my first death. There was no way I was going to win a fight against any of them, so I decided to use the old tried and true technique of legging it past them and dodging their attacks. This came with the same sort of issues that the Emelian tomb came with, as I didn't know my way around this place, and every dead end or unsure decision led to me getting manhandled by an ogre. Eventually, I found myself ascending up some stairs, and it unlocked a core memory of a push block and jumping down. Doing so, I retrieved the amulet and attempted to make a beeline for the exit. Unfortunately, the two ogres I first encountered were still guarding the way out of this little nook. So I let them come into the room with me, where I broke their ankles and then continued on for the exit. Oddly enough, there was a third ogre blocking me from leaving, and this was one I had never seen before. I couldn't get past it, so I hurried into the previous big room and prayed that the other two ogres wouldn't sneak up from behind me. Luckily, this plan worked, and I was able to finally exit Sedor and made it a safe distance away for fast travel. I handed the relic back to Sirach and Bruma, and he gifted me with probably the best reward yet: 3 strong potions of healing. Returning back to Azan, he paid me out my sum of 100 gold, and that was it for contracts coming from him. I fast traveled over to Shaden Hall and spoke with Burz Grokash about my next contract. He assigned me with the Noble's Daughter quest, and I made my way for Lord Rugdump's estate. This was one of the few quests that I truly had no idea how I was going to handle. I knew that I'd be forced to fight and kill at least 3 ogres on my own. Not an impossible task, but so far it's proved to be not very easy either. Making it to Rugdump Manor and entering inside, the Lord informed me of the situation at hand: his missing daughter and the aggressive ogres. As a side note, Rugdump's dialogue might be some of the funniest and best written within the whole game. The whole trope of an orc trying their best to act overly posh and noble-like is amazing. I exited the estate and made my way over to the quest marker. Immediately, I spotted the ogres, and in some sixth sense fashion, they spotted me. I had a few ways in which I wanted to try and handle this. Pulling 2 of them over, I brought them to Rugdump's land and they got stuck on the fence line. I tried to leap in and land some cheap hits, but every time I got close, I would get clobbered. Eventually, the ogres made it through the fence and I tried my second idea. I went inside of the Lord's estate and pulled Rugdump into the fight. It looked like he readied himself against the ogre, but after taking some damage, he tried to flee in fear. The ogre slapped him into Oblivion, rendering him unconscious, and this was when I decided to try my third and cheekiest idea. I reverted my last save and this time pulled the attention of all 3 ogres. With the 3 brutes following me, my plan was to bring them all to the city of Shaden Hall and enter inside of its walls. The kiting took a very long time. They moved at decent paces, but they would often take weird routes and split off from one another. Given how long this was going to take, I didn't want to have to repeat this process twice if one of them got left behind. At one point, they got stuck in a running animation on a cliffside, and one of them refused to follow me down any further. After quite some time, it finally resumed the chase with its friends, and we continued towards the city. Nearing the gate, I attracted the attention of a wolf, a bandit, and a rat. With 6 assailants chasing me, my game started to freak out and freeze a whole lot. I knew this was a bad sign, and as soon as I entered inside of the city, where the guards took down only one of the ogres and exited back out, my game crashed. Fortunately, my save wasn't so long ago, but I still had to repeat a third of the trek. Making it back to Shaden Hall this time with only the 3 ogres on my tail, one by one they entered into the city with me, and the guards took them out. As soon as the third one was killed, I was able to reach Lady Rogbutt in the rolling hills near the estate and escort her back to the manor. The Lord rewarded me with his sword, and upon returning back to Burz, he paid me out 100 gold and restored my rank of Guardian. For the last regular contract within the Fighters Guild, Burrs asked me to look into some disappearances at the settlement of Harlan's Watch. Venturing out just south of the city, Jorana Thalis filled me in on the phenomenon that's been happening. Residents have been seeing strange lights near Swampy Cave, they go to investigate and are never heard from again. This contract was also one that I had made special mental note for. I knew I was going to be fighting will-o'-the-wisps, which I wouldn't be able to do any damage to. On top of that, I knew there were going to be more trolls inside of the cave. I had thought though that this was one quest where I could run in, discover the bodies, and then run back out. Doing so, I legged it through the tunnels, fought off a swamp troll, and made it to the small room with the human remains. This was when I received a disheartening journal update letting me know that I had to clear out the entire cave of trolls. This was going to be tricky now as I had captured the attention of the wisps and had no way of getting them off my tail, or, for that matter, being able to heal myself via resting. Figuring I would just go through the motions and see how it plays out, I moved through the cave and came across more trolls. The swamp trolls were roughly the same stats-wise as the savage trolls. It took 2 or 3 heavy hits to kill them, and probably not too far off from that number for them to kill me. Soon, I experienced a mysterious phenomenon similar to what happened a couple of quests ago. The swamp trolls would engage briefly in combat and then flee, running a marathon around the whole zone. I didn't really know why this was happening, to be honest. My best guess was maybe the will-o'-the-wisps were causing them to run away from me, but I couldn't be for certain. Fortunately, I soon moved on to the next zone where all of the trolls that were one punch away from dying were located. Killing them off, I ventured further in and tried to take on a whole group of them. I was out of potions, in too deep, and eventually my inevitable death happened. This was when I decided I wanted to reset and restock on potions. It was also where I discovered another really strange occurrence. The will-o'-the-wisps weren't aggressive towards me. They were following me around, making it impossible to rest and replenish my health, but they weren't attacking me or anything like that. I tried attacking them in the beginning, and I didn't have any console commands active or anything of the sort. Maybe they were just taking pity on a poor old beggar. Deciding to push it to the limit and taking out one more swamp troll, I left the cave and fled back to Harlan's Watch. Oddly enough, the wisps didn't follow me beyond there, and I never saw them again. Buying a couple of health potions from All Things Alchemical and returning back to Swampy Cave, I was actually able to rest in the first zone, so I knew I had something going for me this time round. Making my way back into the second zone, again there was a straggler waiting to get pummeled. I made the rounds, heavy attacking the trolls and slowly getting closer to my goal. I was still pretty thrilled that the trolls weren't too difficult of fights yet. Some of them ran away from me still, and others chose to stay and make my life a bit easier. Finally, I slew the last one and returned back to Jorana. She thanked me for my efforts, and I reported back to Burrs, who paid me out my 100 gold and promoted me to the rank of champion. It was now time for the endgame quests of the Fighters Guild storyline. Returning back to Coral, I popped into Modron's home and he told me of his plan to capture Ajum Kajin of the Blackwood Company at Glade Mist Cave in order to interrogate him. I was always disappointed that Orain didn't accompany the player on this mission. He's expelled from the guild already, so technically he has nothing to lose by tagging along. Of course, other than his life, but something tells me he doesn't value that too much. I bought out one more health potion from Falanu and then made my way over to Glade Mist Cave. Entering inside, I wasn't sure what to expect out of the fighters. It felt like pretty balanced matchups for the most part. They would get my health down by a bit, and I'd have to put in the work to defeat them. I encountered quite a few archers to begin with. I never minded fighting them though, as their slowness in letting off their arrows made it easy to charge in and pummel them. Eventually though, I did get into a hairy situation in where I accidentally aggroed onto 3 melee fighters at once. Thinking I was clever in getting a sneak attack in, it turned out to only attract the attention of the other 2 mercenaries whom were apparently really close by. I thought the best course of action was to hold them at a choke point on a natural bridge I had just passed over. It worked in some regard as one fighter got himself stuck trying to get over it, and the other 2 alone were much more manageable. I killed one of them and soon after, managed to kill the second one. At this point though, all my health potions were gone and I was really low on HP. I readied myself as the last fighter came running back up. I'd like to think I fought well here, dodging his heavy attacks and timing my strikes in between so I could jump in and quickly get out. With a little bit of luck, I dealt the killing blow, and that was the last of the resistance in the cave. Continuing along the tunnel system for a bit brought me to Ajum Kajin, who willingly followed me out of the cave and back over to Coral. Once back at Modron's home, we seated him down and I began wailing on him for answers. He told us how many members the Blackwood Company had, as well as who their leader was, but as soon as he was asked about the source of their power, Ajum Kajin equipped a cursed ring and ended up dying. Speaking with Modron, he gave me the reward of the Lesser Amulet of Interrogation. He then directed me to do what could be my favorite quest in this whole storyline. I was sent over to the Blackwood Company's headquarters in Leyawiin in order to infiltrate their ranks. Doing so, I spoke with Jitum Z, whom, after hearing the lie that I left the Fighters Guild due to money, welcomed me with open arms. I followed him to the basement where he gave out a contract to myself and several other newer members. At the end of it, he informed me of their history and how they use its sap to embolden their fighters. Drinking my portion of the elixir, I blacked out and ended up at Water's Edge. The four of us were tasked with killing the goblins that were causing trouble to the settlement. I went in, fists blazing, totally aware that I was actually slaying its sheep and settlers. The other three fighters held most of the aggro, and I really didn't need to deal much damage either. From there, I went into each individual house and continued with the carnage. Once all of the goblins were defeated, I blacked out again and woke up in Modron's home all the way out in Coral. Orain fills me in on how I got back, and I tell him about the history sap. He suggests that I go back to Water's Edge in order to see what had actually happened. This was where I saw exactly what and who I killed whilst under the influence of the elixir. Speaking with Marcel Emilian, Bien's father, it is a pretty emotional and troubling time to be a part of. Returning to Modron, he tells me that it wasn't my fault and suggests one final assault against the Blackwood Company in Leyawiin. Returning back to Falanu one last time, I bought 2 more potions from her, although to be honest, I was fairly confident that I had the rest of this storyline in the bag. Going to Leyawiin and entering inside of the Blackwood Company headquarters, they were all aggressive towards me now, so I proceeded to pull each individual member out of their establishment and kite them through the town, allowing the townsfolk to jump in on the action. The second guard posted in their HQ was an archer, so I was able to take matters into my own hands by getting in close and battering him down. The third was another sword fighter, so I took him through a tour of the town and he didn't actually make it that far at all. Because this final bit took place in the city and I knew the guards and citizens were going to be on my side, I was pretty much in celebration mode already. The fourth person I baited and lured outside was Jitum Z, a necessary kill in order to get to Rizikar. For Jitum, I ran pretty far and didn't look back for some time. When I finally did though, he'd gone his own way into town, creating all new enemies. By the time I laid eyes on him again, his body was lifeless on the ground. Going after the big boss now, he took a little more work to lure down the HQ and out into the streets. Once I did though, the townspeople who hated this group just as much as the Fighters Guild did got their sweet revenge. Before I knew it, Rizikar was dead and all that was left was the history. Making my way down into their basement, the 2 enemies I faced were these crazed workers named Hears Voices in the Air and Sings Like Thunder. I decided for this one that I would take them on alone, as one final send-off for this Oblivion challenge. Halfway through the fight, things were looking dire, so I popped my final 2 health potions. Shortly after that, Hears Voices was dead. Sings Like Thunder put up a great match, as for a bit, it looked like the result was going to be a toss-up. Ultimately, in the end, I got the upper hand and beat him down. Grabbing the 2 loose pipes that were laying around, I jammed them into the machines, setting fire to the tree. Exiting the basement, the final boss arrived, and Maglir was extremely mad at me. Again, 0 redeeming qualities in his character, so because he wanted to be a Blackwood Company merc so bad, I let him die like one. I brought him out into the streets where the people who once respected and admired him could tear him apart. With Maglir slain, thus ends the Fighters Guild questline, and ultimately, my Oblivion challenge run finishes off as a success. So, what are my thoughts on the Beggar build and role-playing as one through quests? Well, as you probably could have guessed, this build is not good for anything other than a challenge. To be honest, as the storyline progressed, I wasn't having as much fun as I was originally and was kind of more so just gunning for it to be over. It's a hard way to play through the game, and there isn't much room for growth or development with this build. If I was anything beyond level 1 or 2, I think this questline would have become even more difficult to get through, especially when it came to facing off against the trolls. For the most part, it felt like I was going to be a hand-to-hand fighter, destined to have already reached my ceiling. I'm happy and content with the way I handled the build though. It felt right not to use any offensive or defensive gear, and it's always fun to work for what you buy. I did do a lot of fighting, and it feels like beggars do more running than combat, but it was pretty necessary for being able to actually get through these quests. Again, similar to the Conjurer run-through in the arena, health potions were the MVPs, along with external help from nearby citizens. Overall, it felt like a success, and for the most part I did have fun. I'm looking forward to getting to do more of these. On the screen are the ideas that will be done in the near future. If you have any more you'd like to suggest, feel free to comment them below, and until next time, keep on adventuring.